It is past 6:30, so we will go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. For those that are able, if you wouldn't mind standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All board members are present, so I will call this meeting to order. Dr. Phillips.
Turn on my power here. There you go. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'd like to start each meeting by reminding ourselves and others of the mission, vision, and core values of the district. Our vision is for BCSC to become the choice to learn, work, and play. Our mission is to develop expert learners by partnering with our community to invest in people. And our core beliefs are that we all can rise to the challenge of high expectations. Learning is most effective when we have choice, flexibility, and see relevance. We thrive when our physical, social, and psychological needs are met. Our community and school district are stronger when we partner with one another. We flourish because of the diversity and variability in our community, and our democracy and democratic institutions are strengthened by civic-minded citizens. I'll emphasize that both we started with the pledge and that last core value there mean a lot this week as we observe the anniversary of 9/11.
Thank you. Mrs. Vogel.
Thank you for the opportunity this evening to share with you some of the exciting programs we have in BCSC that promote inclusion and help create meaningful friendships among students. Tonight I have with me Brett Finley, principal at CSA Lincoln, Elizabeth Dwyer, special education teacher at Clifty Creek Elementary School and the Unified Track coach at Columbus North, and Peggy Myers, special education teacher and Unified Track coach at Columbus East. And I'm going to start off by letting Mr. Finley share with you about Young Champions.
Thank you. So Young Champions, this is when you look at the unified track system, it's the youngest of the crew. So I get the little kids, and we're going to kind of go up from there. And I'm a part of a committee that oversees just the process for the Young Champions meet. And while these are the committee members, it doesn't take into consideration the teachers, the special education teachers, the teaching assistants, and of course the students who put a lot of time and effort into this experience. So the program for Young Champions is 12 weeks in length. Each school handles it a little bit different. This was Lincoln's first time this past year being involved in it, so our view might look a little different than maybe Schmidt or Clifty Creek, who has now done it for 2 years. And so it involves the special education teachers, the speech therapists, the physical therapists, the classified staff members, and in many cases, high school volunteers. And it ultimately ends in a track meet, and that's what we're getting to. And it is a track meet that includes hurdles, relay races, those types of events, but also some other activities to keep the kids engaged during the day. During the 3-year transformation in 2021, 2022, it was just the pre-K program was involved. And I was involved last year for the first time, and so there's some things that took place, and we had some great things. So they used to wear T-shirts. Last year was the first year we said, you know what, let's put these kids in the cross-country jerseys. And nothing's cuter than a kid in a cross-country jersey, and we wanted them to look good. We wanted them to feel great about representing their school, and it was a real positive. BCSC funded transportation. We all went to Columbus East last year, and there were 8 elementaries that participated. So 2 years ago, it was just 2 elementaries plus the pre-K. We had 8, and then excited to announce that Next year, all 11 elementaries plus the pre-K are going to be involved in the meet as we continue this progression. So here you can see quickly in numbers, and that's actually Mrs. Vogel's daughter in that picture who's working with an activity at school. But in 2023, we saw 155 students. In 2024, there were 355, and we expect with 3 additional elementaries, those numbers are going to continue to increase. So as you can see, it's a really big event. We're excited about it. We'll be back at Columbus East, and it takes place in May. And Josh Burnett does a phenomenal job, as we all know, with videos, and he put this together, and it kind of captures the whole meet last year. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
Welcome to a special celebration of youth and sportsmanship. Today we're taking you behind the scenes of the 2024 Young Champions Field Day, held on sunny Stafford Field at Columbus East High School. This year's Field Day is bigger than ever. With the participation of several BCSC elementary schools, Young Champions continues to champion inclusive play and athletic development for all children, regardless of ability. Young Champions isn't just about sports. It's about creating an inclusive environment where every child gets to shine. From the first practice to today's field day, these young athletes have been honing their skills in running, kicking, and throwing, embracing healthy habits for the future. And it's not just the kids who are involved. Families, teachers, and the whole community have come together, making it a collaborative effort that enriches everyone involved. Each athlete here tells a story of perseverance, friendship, and learning. It's about building life skills and friendships that last a lifetime. As we wrap up today's event, we reflect on the growth and success of the Young Champions program. Great job to all the students, staff, and families of BCSC. Today you all showed what it means to be a true young champion. Every child deserves a chance to play, learn, and grow together. Welcome to.
Thanks. Thank you. I mean, it's hard to put it any better than that. I can't stress enough the incredible hard work by the special education teachers, the occupational therapists, the physical therapists who put a lot of time and effort. I was just lucky to be a part of the committee the last couple of years and help connect dots, but the bulk of the work were done by those individuals. So as we look forward, we want to increase participation, we want to continue to strengthen those relationships, and we want to instill a sense of accomplishment within our children. And about to turn it over here, but our next step is obviously creating a foundation for our unified track program.
Thank you. So, Brett talked about the foundation for the unified track program. And so you can see here, this is a picture that was taken this past spring at the Unified Track Meet between East and North. Unified Track is a IHSA sanctioned sport, and the students or the athletes who participate in that participate in long jump, shot put, 100-meter dash, 400-meter dash, and then there's a 400-meter relay for both the boys and the girls. In addition to the dual track meets, the athletes compete in a sectional meet and then from there qualify for regional and state meets. So if you haven't had a chance to attend one of these unified track meets, I really encourage you to take the time to do so. The sportsmanship among the teammates and the competitors is definitely inspirational.
So looking at our numbers from previous years, in 2014, Columbus North had 13 students and Columbus East had 20 students. In 2024, our past season, Columbus North had 33 students and Columbus East had 27. Our pre-COVID numbers are significantly higher than what they were this past season, but we still have some great students that come out for the team, and they put forth all of their effort into the team and make sure all the students have a great time. I've been with the team since 2015, which was my sophomore year, and it was one of the reasons that I went into education, specifically special education. So all of my fondest memories of high school were with Unified Track, and then now I've been the head coach for now 4 years in the spring. So I absolutely love the program, and it's just done amazing things for not only myself, but also a lot of other students that are within Columbus North, and I know Columbus East too.
All right, so earlier I mentioned the sportsmanship that I observed when I was at several of the track meets this year. And you can see from Jarek's quote that not only is sportsmanship something that he values in unified track, but he's also learning how to be a leader through his experience. And Peggy Myers asked students and athletes earlier this past week to share their thoughts on unified track, and here's what one of them had to say.
My name is Melee. My favorite track is long jump. I listen to my coaches do my best.
And I can tell you from being at the track meets that Maylee is definitely one of the students who's out there cheering on both her teammates and the competitors from the other teams. It's really great to see. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, so the other unified sports and activities, there are a variety of activities and ways for students to get involved. Many of these activities were actually started because of, or are continuing now, because of students' senior projects. So the unified basketball game, if you've been to a girls' East-North basketball game, you've probably had a chance to see at halftime the unified basketball game that's played. And then this year, the unified bocce ball and unified ag, those are new. And the United Sound is in its second year. It was new last year. So students participating in United Sound, they learn to read music through visuals, and then they're also learning how to play instruments as well. And they participate in the concerts throughout the school year with the bands. The Unified Ag is a program that's through the Future Farmers of America, and students participate in quarterly activities as well as a unified horticulture contest. And then finally, Best Buddies. It really does pair nicely with the other unified activities as it promotes inclusion and friendships among students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers. And so what we're really hoping is that we see an increase in the number of students participating in this, just because we have a variety of different activities that are available to students. And then also because we have those younger students coming up through elementary school. Our hope in the next year or two is to get a program started at the middle school so that kids can come from elementary through middle school and then on to high school and participate in those activities. Any questions?
From the team?
So what would you suspect are the relationships between participation in programs like this and academic progress, progress in life skills? Is there a tie?
Is there a tie between the academic outcomes of the students who are in life skills and their participation in this?
Yes.
Yeah, would you like to answer that?
While I haven't taken any data, I would suspect highly. In our own classroom, we see increase in social skills and increase in determination and self-advocacy. All of these clubs and sports are with me, not for me. So the unified track kids are also, all of them are competitors, whether they are typically developing peer or a student with a disability. So we see a increase in their self-concept, and their self-determination, because they see their friends doing the same thing.
Thank you.
In looking at the numbers that you presented, what barriers do you may have for this board in trying to get back to the pre-COVID participation? Is there any barriers that we can help with?
Barriers to getting increased participation that they can help with?
Increased participation amongst the unified athletes, so athletes who have disability, is transportation. That's the biggest one. And as far as the athletes without, or the buddies, the peer buddies, it's that they tend to be involved in so many things. But I think we've done a really good job, especially with Best Buddies this year, of recruiting students who aren't involved in everything. And our Best Buddies president has done a really great job with reaching out to everyone across the board at the school.
Thank you.
So my question you already answered. It was going to be, what about middle school?
Yeah.
But I just want to say I'm glad that you have that in your radar, looking forward that we would expand this to their opportunity for them. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Awesome program. Elizabeth, you have some fans in the audience. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, school board member reports. Can I start with Mr. Bryant? If you had any committee meetings? Nope, you're good. Mr. Major? Nope. Mr. Stenner?
We have a districting and facilities committee will participate with planning committee for the new West Side School. Meeting is this Friday, I think. So nothing to report tonight, but we'll have something soon.
Good, thank you. I don't have anything to report. Mr. Grimes?
Two quick items from the School Foundation. Just another reminder that in just a couple months, Sunday, November 10, mark your calendars for the Wizards at Columbus East, the School Foundation's biggest fundraiser of the year. Information to be scattered about soon regarding that. And then lastly, Mrs. Cunningham, the School Foundation's former executive director, left to take another position in the middle of August, and the foundation is now at a point where a new executive director has been found. I will not name names at this point, but they will be starting in the near future. That's it.
So we've had no meetings lately, but CCIC meets, I believe, on Wednesday. And then also Hall of Fame nominations have been opened. They are due, Sherry, November 1st, I believe, is the deadline. So for being able to get those nominations in, they are due November 1st for consideration.
And my committees are starting up again this week, but I don't have anything tonight.
Okay, thank you. Cabinet reports. Dr. Phillips?
All right, thank you, Mrs. Wielden. So I am actually going to do the budget workshop for you this evening. Jamie Brenniger, our new corporation treasurer, I talked him into letting me go ahead and just walk through this first one, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So I get to go back into my CFO role for a little bit tonight, so I'm going to probably go for a good hour and a half. So I apologize ahead of time.
I have the gavel, Dr. Phillips.
That's right. And somebody over there can turn off my mic, I'm sure. So this is the beginning of a process that really lasts between now and the end of the calendar year. And so tonight is just a work session as we go through the budget in its current form. That will be then posted 10 days online in advance, 10 days before the public hearing on the 23rd. So we'll go through a little bit more refined version of this same presentation on the evening of the 23rd, and then members of the public can also chime in at that time. The vote is October 28th, and the budget has to be adopted by November 1st. And then we will submit to the Department of Local Government Finance, after which they then issue our debt rate, our property tax rate. I apologize, not debt rate, property tax rate, sometime around the first of the year. And so some of the highlights of the 2025 budget, as we've spoken about for the last few years, there continues to be a significant investment in our staff, both through salary and benefit increases. On the right side there, this is new, we haven't put this in there in the past, probably because we haven't been able to be this proud of how much we've been able to invest in salaries for our teachers and classified staff both. And you can see going back to 2021, classified staff, the average increase was 9% for classified staff. In 2022, we did a large comprehensive study and adjusted many different employee groups in the classified staff group. The average raise there was 11.1%, but that was also the point when we raised the minimum salary, hourly salary for any classified staff employee to $14, and it's gone up since then, 6%, 8%, and then 3% next July 1. Teaching staff average raises in there. Sometimes those are flat dollar amounts across the board, but the percentage average was 6%, 6.1, 8.3 last year, and then 3% to begin this school year that we're in now. We'll bargain next year. Administrative staff there, you can see the percentages. Average, sometimes those were also flat dollar amounts, but the average increase was 2, 6, 2.7, and 3%. So that is the biggest part of the school district's budget. It always is. We're a very labor-intensive organization, and we're people-driven, and so it's always where you're going to see the biggest investment from our tax dollars. So that's the increases in salary. We also saw this year, I'm trying to think of a year that we added more positions to the education fund than we have this year. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but we added total of 12 full-time positions to the education fund this year. Those aren't all new positions, but they're new to the education fund. So it was a total of 2 at grades K through 6. We also added 4 literacy coaches as part of the I Read 3 strategy to really dramatically increase those fundamental reading skills at the primary level. And we only pay 1/3 of those salaries in year 1, 2/3 in year 2, and then 100% in year 3. So that was an equivalent of a 1.33 FTE increase. We added 2.5 positions at the secondary level. Those are at the core positions, math, science, English, and social studies. About 1 2/3 positions to C4. And that's just pointing out the dramatic increase in demand for the CTE courses in C4. We have added 8 FTEs to C4 in the last 2 years. And so there just continues to be more and more kids who want to take those courses. And so we do everything we can to try to fill those positions. We did add a position at each high school in the cohorts, so the teams at the high school level. One was an administrator at East, so that each cohort had a assistant principal, and then one was academic coach at North. And now at North, because of the size of their cohorts, each of them has 2 academic coaches. Added 2 special education teachers and 1 EL teacher to the education fund. So really large investment in people for this year. Some of those positions, it's 7 or 8, were actually a result of the end of ESSER funding. And so they were all being funded by ESSER, which was our federal COVID relief program that's been in place for the last 3 years. That concludes actually this month. We will spend every dime of that through the end of this month. And so some of those positions we looked at and said those are truly needed, they're not additional, and moved them over to the education fund. You'll also see in this budget, in the operations fund side, some really significant investments in capital. Number 1 is safety and security infrastructure. There is a $2 million line on the appropriations for safety and security equipment. Our plan initially was to put a $500,000 line item for the next 4 years, but after talking and discussing here for a while, we made the decision to go ahead and put the full $2 million there, because if in the middle of a calendar year the technology advances such that there's some really strong, we'll just say metal detectors, for example, that aren't intrusive and kids can just walk in and it doesn't really result in a long line of people outside the door, we could choose to invest in that in the middle of the year and purchase those, get ready for the next school year without having to wait to do an additional appropriation. So it may take us 4 years to spend that money, or it may be done in 2. But each of those appropriations will be brought before the board in your board packet each time. We do have ongoing facility maintenance, as is always the case. in our operations fund budget, and then some investments in co-curricular programs, particularly band. I'll get to some details on that. And all of this, because of assessed value increasing by almost 11%, we anticipate that the tax rate will not increase. In fact, may decrease just a tad as it has the last few years. So one of the things that's really important to understand about the way that we have to budget at the school level is that we are required to make a whole lot of assumptions going into the year. We are budgeting for calendar year 2025 when we don't know how many students we're going to have in the spring, we don't know how many students we're going to have in the fall, and we don't know how much the state is going to appropriate per student starting on July 1. So there are a lot of assumptions we have to build into to the budget to build it. So our assumptions are that we will have about just under 97 million in education fund revenues. That's up just over 3% over the previous year. And we know what the per pupil support is for 24-25, but that only goes through June of 25. And so we have made an assumption that the state will increase state funding in 25, fiscal year 26 by 3%. We're hearing lots of chatter that it'll be a tight budget season, but that's the assumption that we plugged in. So our ADM estimates, we also have to make estimates of where we're going to be from a student count standpoint. We would normally be right at the ADM date, but they moved it back to October this year. So right now we are estimating that our October count will be flat. As of today, it's closer to about 50 up, which is really a surprise because we have a small kindergarten class, which everybody in the state, I'm hearing, has a small kindergarten class coming in. And we had a large outgoing senior class. So you can see that we had 901 kids graduate last year and only right around 800 coming in. But so many of our students have stayed compared to previous years, and we have a lot of students coming in at the high school level, for example, from the private schools in town that are our partners. So anyway, I think we'll be up probably somewhere between 20 and 40 by the time ADM day comes around. But from a budgeting standpoint, as you know we always do, we budget low and conservative when it comes to revenues. We also think we'll have about 230 students in CVP this year. That's only significant from a budget standpoint because we only receive 85% of state support for students that are in CVP. For this spring, we are estimating that we'll be down about 50 students. Some of you will remember that for the last few years, I've budgeted that at 100 or 150, but our cohorts are doing such a good job of keeping kids connected at the high school level and keeping them from dropping out that that number was really low last year, and so I have good reason to believe it'll be low again this year. And then for the fall of next year, we're also estimating that ADM will be flat from this fall, I should say. So line by line on the education fund, flip my notes, I'm behind on. Just going line by line, the overall revenues we expect to be up 3.2%. And let me go back actually there to 2024. I want to remind you, so this is why I told Mr. Brinegar that I would do this presentation tonight, because I stood in front of you with Amy London last year when we settled the contract in October, and we said, we believe this contract is a good contract and it's a contract we can afford, and it got us to a really competitive starting salary. But we anticipated we'll take an additional appropriation in 2024, the current year, but that additional appropriation will actually be supported by revenues. And so you can see that in 2024 there, we started the year with just under 6.4 million. And even with our anticipated additional appropriation that we'll bring to you next board meeting, we think we will still end the year right at about that 6.4 or a little more. But I also told you when we stood there that in 2025, we anticipate that we will eat into our cash balance a little bit. It's called deficit financing, but our cash balance being somewhere between $6.5 and $7 million allows us to spend about $2 million of that cash balance in 2025. Again, the vast majority of that going towards teacher salary increases and classified staff salary increases. So the 2025 column there shows total revenues of just under 97% and total expenditures of just under $99 million, sorry, not percent. So 97 coming in, 99 going out, about a net of $2 million decline in our cash balance. That does allow us to still meet our goal of being able to meet 2 education fund payrolls, just in case something happens from a revenue standpoint. We can still handle two payrolls, plus we have the rainy day balance to lean upon. So I want to go down the lines here really quickly and just explain any of the increases over the prior year. First 2 there are obvious salaries and benefits. Those are both due to the increase in the number of people, particularly teachers, but mainly the salary increases that we passed last fall. Going down to the professional service line, that decline there is because oftentimes we are contracting for a position in one year, and then we are able to find a person to fill that position in the next year, and so it moves to salary and benefits, and then the next year it'll move back. This just happens to be a year we were able to fill most of our positions. So those are almost always speech therapists, occupational therapists, school psychs, visually impaired. We have one visually impaired, I think, that we're contracting with a service for this year. Just really difficult positions, and so the only reason for the decline in that line is due to the fact that we moved some people over to salary and benefits. On the comms line, that increase is due to the increase in the cost of software for students. So that one's all student-used software in the classroom on their Chromebooks. On the supply line, that one is also due to computers, but mainly because we needed to replace the laptop or desktops in the labs that are mainly used by C4. And so we had some really old computers that run some pretty high-end programs that you can't use a Chromebook for. So even though every student has a Chromebook, there's a desktop in some of those labs that really needs to be a stronger machine. And those labs are really old, and Dr. Hack, has been begging us for a while to upgrade those. And so Mr. Williams included that in the budget for this year, and that's on the supply line. Going down to dues and fees is obviously just a very slight increase there. So down on the transfer line, the State Board of Accounts had us start putting the transfer to the special ed co-op for our portion of that down in transfers. But the transfers to operations, as you remember, we transfer costs that used to be part of the general fund from the education fund to the operations fund. That amount is actually declining by about $600,000 for this coming year, and I'll get into that detail on a slide here in just a little bit. So this is just one that we like to put up there just to remind folks that our education fund budget, which is the largest portion of our budget, 95.2% of that in 2025 will be for salaries and benefits. Are there any questions from the board on the education fund budget before I move to operations? Yes, Mr. Stinner.
If we had another column titled 2026 and start the year with that new balance from operations in 2025, are we good to go for 2026?
That's going to rely on 3 different things that are coming up that are unknown. The legislative session, which they'll do the budget for 2 years. So when they pass a budget this coming late April, we will know what that's going to be for the 25-26 school year and the 26-27 school year. Our ADM student count will obviously drive that revenue stream, and it'll also depend on collective bargaining this coming fall, a year from now. And so those are all 3 things that'll to be determined. And as long as we continue to be conservative and underestimating our revenues and overestimating our expenditures and making sure that we bargain a contract that's both fair and keeps us keeps us well positioned from a financial standpoint, then we should be in good shape for 26 and beyond. Mr. Now.
The CVP numbers that you showed us, are those full-time online students as opposed to, I know we have some students that do some courses online and not others.
Those are students that are 50% or more of their time is spent online. That's what the criteria the state uses to determine whether or not they're a virtual student or not. And so some of those students, may be exactly half. They may be taking half of their classes in C4 or a band course or a calculus course, but they're taking their other ones online. The number of students taking one class or more online is probably more in the 450 range.
For the transfer to operations, I know the number's going down. You mentioned specific items. Are you going to cover that in operations? Okay.
I'm going to give you the detail of it, yeah. Okay. Okay, so operations fund, we also have to make some revenue assumptions, but they're not quite as flexible as the ones for the education fund. We anticipate revenues in the operations fund to be about just under $35 million in 2025, and that's about a 10% increase. And it does include about $2.4 million in tax cap losses in 2025, which is actually down. I'll show you a table here in a moment, a graph. And so the maximum levy that the DLGF and the state of Indiana imposes upon school districts is usually a moving target based on the average non-farm income for the previous 6 years. I know you guys are just riveted by this conversation. 6-year rolling average of the non-farm income. The last 3 years, the legislature has capped that and said it doesn't matter what that goes up. We're going to say you can't increase your levy by more than 4%. And so with a levy increase of 4% and the assessed value going up more than 10%, that means that the operations fund portion of the tax rate will decline. And so you'll see that on your tax bill when you look at the operations line, that part of the tax rate will decline. If it were the opposite and assessed value had only gone up 2%, you would see an increase in that. Here's just a graph showing the history of tax cap losses to the operations fund over time. You see that 2025's estimates are actually down from the previous couple of years, and that's entirely due to assessed value increases. So here is that line-by-line detail for the operations side of the budget. And I'm going to get my notes and go through this one. So again, you'll see revenues of just under $35 million and estimated expenditures down on the bottom of just under $39 million. And so this is our 4th year at attempting to spend down some of the cash in the operations fund, but revenues continue to outpace expenditures. And so we're not going at $2 million this year, we're going at $4 million to attempt to spend that down a little bit. So we also anticipate that in 2024, we'll end this year somewhere near the same cash balance that we started the year with, somewhere around that $14 million mark. But on the expenditure side, some of those investments that you'll see, again, salaries and benefits on the operations fund side, they're a much smaller proportion of the operations fund budget. And those increases are mainly almost all classified staff. And so those are all of our custodians, technology staff, bus drivers, and so on. On the professional services line, that line increase there is actually mostly an increase in the cost of school resource officers. So some of you know that the city and county both had to increase pay dramatically just to keep pace with the state troopers to make sure we didn't lose all of our local police officers. And so we're happy to do that to keep our outstanding SROs that we have assigned to our schools. On the repair and maintenance line, that increase is really mostly due to the cost of external services like preventive maintenance on HVAC systems and other labor-driven work that we pay other entities to do for us. There's also a new line in there. It's about $100,000 for the lease on the CVP property. We were using ESSER funds for the CVP lease, but we'll be using operations fund for the next year and a half, and that is set to end in June of '26. At the end of that period of time, we hope to find another home for CVP. It is down, that 230 number is down from 400 where we were 3 years ago as we came out of COVID. And so we expect the demand for those in virtual programs for full-time students to continue to decline. On the communications line, that's an increase in property and liability insurance, which I think everybody is seeing. And then also some increases in software and network costs on the technology side. The supply line, you'll see that's an increase of $1.3 million right there. That's actually a large increase in our expected utilities for electricity and also custodial and maintenance supplies. So 1 million of that is actually an estimated increase in our electric utility bill. Part of that is because we under budgeted last year. We don't expect to see $1 million increase in our electric bill, but we under budgeted last year and used some leftover unexpended appropriations from prior years during last year. The property and equipment line, as I mentioned before, that's where we're making our largest investment in safety and security. There's some trade-off there. We actually see a decrease in the number of buses that we need in order to keep all of our buses at the, under that 12-year-old range. And so you'll see a decrease in that, but then a $2 million appropriation for that safety and security equipment line. And then there's also a one-time appropriation in there. I mentioned co-curricular programs earlier. One-time appropriations for some band equipment. We have a unified band now, as you know, between both of our schools. The Sound and Spirit of Columbus had a large invitational on Saturday night. Anyone that lives around the north area heard it until 9 or 10 o'clock that evening. They're in need of upgrading some of their equipment. They have some of the trailers, and we'd love to see those trailers decorated with the Sound and Spirit of Columbus, as opposed to what they were before. And so the total in the ops budget increase is about 12%. But this one, the operations fund budget is a little bit different than the education fund budget. Mr. Stenner, to your point, a lot of these are one-time expenditures and they're not ongoing. And so to see that drawdown of a $4 million amount on the cash balance, that's not an ongoing thing that we would see year after year. Any questions on operation fund budget before I move on?
Which line items is the transfer from education covering for operations?
That is on the education fund side because it comes from education fund to operations. And so that's in the other line on revenues there, the 13.1 million.
Yeah, but if I recall, you mentioned that this was to cover stuff that priorly was covered. Can you give an example of what that would be?
So all custodial costs used to be in the general fund. Actually, all superintendent's office and all the assistant superintendents, some of the technology. So if it's not classroom technology, then it went over to the operations side. So any software or hardware that's related to district programs like board docs, for example, comes out of the operations side. But a student who's using learning software on their Chromebook, that's coming out of the education fund side.
Thank you.
Yeah, a real quick question. You mentioned the buses, or not buses, but trailers for band. Are we paying somebody to do the design work on that?
All that is still to be determined. The band directors are probably sitting at home right now watching this online saying, what? You appropriated money for us?
Well,
we haven't had those discussions with them at this point.
The reason why I ask is it would be a good opportunity to use C4 Graphic Arts Department to give them an opportunity to kind of put themselves into that. So it's not about solely saving money. I'm assuming the design cost is probably a minuscule compared to the cost of actually doing the artwork and everything on the trailers, but it would be something cool for a possible senior project or something like that. So
thanks for that.
I was going to ask, so at the end of 24, the projected ending balances, 14 million here, I think 6.5 million on the other. When does the DLGF start to say, you've got too much imbalances at the end of the year and you need to make some adjustments. I mean, obviously, we're moving to shave that a little bit in both of these funds, but have we gotten feedback from them?
They only do that formally on the debt service funds. The amount of cash you can carry on the debt service fund is limited by law. And even if the board approved a budget that had a larger cash balance, when we got our budget order from them, they will just reduce it because what the board approves is a maximum. I know that folks at the state have looked at cash balances. They're publicly available. Anyone can run a report online and find out what all the districts' cash balances are there. But I think there's an understanding. So this is the only time in history, at least modern history, that I've seen this at BCSC when you look back at our books. But we came out of COVID where we didn't drive buses, for the better part of a school year. We didn't use as much electricity. And so some cash balance built up on that time, obviously, but then it was followed by ESSER funds coming in to help us with HVAC improvements, personnel, all those other things. Those two things combined to see basically almost every district in the state see their cash balances increase. And knowing that is not going to last forever, I would expect to see statewide the trend of what we're showing you here. Let's make sure we put some of that cash balance towards responsibly drawing it down and investing in places that we believe in, our people and safety and security and equipment that are valuable one-time investments. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, and I know it was mentioned about putting 2026 up here, but if you're going from 2024 to 2025 and you're reducing your cash balance by about $4 million, you're looking at about 30 to 40% reduction. So it would be nice to see where does that go, zero or negative? Because I never expect a budget to decrease, but I didn't expect it to increase 11%. So just thinking about that, it would be nice to see where that projects out to zero. Because at some point, then there is going to have to be discussion around the tax rate.
I understand completely, and that's a natural instinct. I will point out that on really the only increases that are ongoing, they only total up to that, somewhere under $1 million total. The other things are all one-time. You spend the money on the equipment and then it's purchased. Not to say you won't have to replace it in 10 or 15 years, depending on technology. But my predecessor used to say, we can do all the projections that we want with school budgets, and then the next legislative session, all of that is changed. And so we will do a projection, but it's likely to change 3 times between now and the end.
Yeah, and I'm fine with it changing because we'll be able to tell a story. But if we don't look at it and we don't take into account that inflation could rise, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of this year, right? There's an election coming up. We know that businesses change their minds on how they want to do things depending on who's going to win. And so that will end up having an impact. And if we look at it today, we can plan for it tomorrow. If we wait till tomorrow, it might be too late. That's all I'm getting at.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Bozeman, I'm sure we've seen this at some point and I've forgotten, but with all of our facilities projects, we are doing a lot of electrical work. We are improving HVAC. We're doing a lot of things to become more efficient. I wouldn't expect to see it in the budget here, but in 2030, do you think all of your design firm power could explain to us what we should be able to see in a decrease in electricity usage, water usage, those types of things from an environmental impact perspective?
Yes, so we work towards those things now. Similarly, I'll mention, Dr. Phillips mentioned the increase in utilities here because of a little bit of catch up, but we've, as you recall, over the past 6 or 7 years, put substantial amount of funding into those items that you're citing already in solar and LED lights across the board. So interestingly, our expenditures have only increased slightly during that time, although the utility companies and water costs and everything have, those rates have increased dramatically. So we've been able to tread water, so to speak, and manage Duke, for example, having 2 rate cases during my time of 15 and 20% increases that our expenditures have been the same. So so yeah, we've been able to maintain expenditures now because of those improvements. But to your question, with our long-range facility planning, all those are definitely being considered, and we can provide a review to you as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So here's the slide that goes into the detail on the transfers between operations and education. The expenditures that moved to operations from education total just under $14 million. So those are all the expenditures that would have been in the old general fund before this law changed. The expenditures that moved the other direction, they moved from operations, those are almost all technology. That totaled $4.8 million. So the net between the two would have been $9.1 million. When Dr. Bozeman and Mr. Brinegar and I sat down and looked at the education fund versus the operations fund, our recommendation to you this evening is to reduce that $9.1 million to just about $8 million because of the cash balance in the operations fund. And the only other factor taking into account, which was a large amount of conversation last year, you'll remember, was the $250,000 transfer for curricular materials. We had budgeted for it in the operating referendum, but there was a lot of discussion about what the best place for that was, and we said, let's just pass the budget, and then we'll look at it at the end of this year before we make that transfer. And so this accounts for that $250,000 for the next 4 years, basically, and would result in it coming from operations instead of the education fund. And so when you look back at the, I keep using my keyboard and that's not working because it's not attached. When you look at the education fund budget, our recommendation down there in the right-hand corner for the transfers to operations is just under 8 million instead of the 9.1 that would be if you transferred all of those expenditures. And so the recommendation is for 25 transfer from education to operations is right at 8 million, which is about 8.4% of the budget, which the state puts a cap on that amount at 15%. And so we remain well below that cap. I know this part can be one of the most confusing parts of the budget. Any questions on that transfer between those two funds? I beat it to death in previous budget hearings, so I understand. So the debt service fund is where you're going to see the biggest change, and that is actually partially as a result of the decrease in the tax rate on the operations side that I mentioned earlier, as well as the operating referendum side that I'll show you here in a minute. And so we eliminated and paid off some debt in 2024. By the end of this year, when we make our final payments, of somewhere about $6 million in payments that we're making in 2024 that we won't make in 2025 because we pay off those old bonds. And then we anticipate we will have the capacity to make a nearly $10 million payment on the first phase of the Envision 2030 projects with still keeping the tax rate flat. And again, that's because of the fact that the operations fund and operating referendum fund rate will go down to the extent that this saves us some money in the long run. The larger payments you make on the front end of a mortgage, for example, the less interest you pay in the long run. And so that should be helpful. So that's the only significant change. The lines that have a dollar amount in 2024 and don't in 2025, those are bonds that we're paying off. And then the 2024 lease rental Envision 2030 Phase 1, a payment of just under $10 million is the net total difference between those two lines. So questions can I answer for you on the debt service fund?
So my assumption is the reason of going 10 million on the Envision 2030 versus trying to pay off the others is the interest rates were less favorable to the most recent, correct?
And we, making additional payments on the old bonds don't benefit us because the payment schedule, the amortization schedule is already defined, the rate is set, we pay it as it's determined. They do have different periods when those old bonds can be refunded at a lower rate, and we almost always take advantage of that, but we don't have one of those coming up for a few years.
Fair enough.
All right, the next one is almost exactly like the previous year. This is the high school, 2010 high school renovation project debt service fund. It's separate because it was passed on a referendum back in 2008, I believe. And so that payment will continue through 2029 when it is paid off. And then the last part of the tax-supported budgets that we're asking the board to approve, the board has to approve before November 1st, is the operating referendum fund. And the operating referendum fund is also capped at that 4% increase in the levy, regardless of what happens with the assessed value. You can see the salary and benefit increases for teachers going up by about $1.1 million, and that's just a continued result of more and more teachers qualifying for those payments because they're staying. It's a evidence that that is actually working because we have more teachers that are staying till their 5th year and their 10th year and their 15th year when they get those larger increases. The rest of the budget is essentially the same with the exception of the bottom line, which is an elimination of that $250,000 transfer for curricular materials.
So the question I had on this, we talked about SROs earlier. The numbers here for safety, security, mental health look like they in total are either flat or lower. And it doesn't follow the trend with the teacher salary at the top. For the safety and security, are the costs captured for SROs in what we talked about earlier or here? Because this number, I wouldn't expect it to go down.
It's both. And so we pay for some of the SROs from the operating referendum fund and the rest from the operations fund. But we put out a budget for the full 8 years of the operating referendum that's on the website. And so I have not varied, with the exception of the teacher salary line because it reflects actuals. I have not varied from that budget in the operating referendum side just for transparency's sake. So we said, I'm going to make up a number and say that was a $200,000 that we said we would spend in 2025 on SROs. And so I kept it at that level. And then I think it increases 5% each year. There is the ability to do that, and revenues would support increasing that line. But again, I just continue to keep that line the same because that's what we put out there when we passed the referendum.
Okay, so the 345 to the 311, why, that's in particular what I just don't understand why that decreased, especially when earlier it was talk about the cost for an SRO increase. So does that 345 to 311, does that mean we have fewer people?
No.
Or we're just taking the money from some other account?
It's actually the professional services line for SROs. Since they're not employed by us, we pay the city and the county. That number also went down though by $53,000.
Yeah.
But it's not the SRO portion of that. It would be other salaries for therapists. We contract with family services to provide some therapists in some of our buildings. That's the portion that actually went down from the prior year.
Yeah, and it's not, I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it because it's not much money at all. It just didn't seem, it seems counterintuitive that
it does.
Others go up and that goes down, both of them. And so maybe we can talk about it a little bit deeper when we get the the full budget to understand it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll send so as we usually do, we get through tonight and the end of this week or so, we'll send the full budget book to the whole board and put it online so everyone in public can pour through about 120 pages of line items in the budget.
So the operating referendum and the high school referendum, those are funded by, obviously, referendums. There's streams that are associated with that. The debt service fund, is that just from surplus property tax revenue?
So everything but the education fund up here, the revenues come from property taxes and then the associated taxes with those. It's excise tax and financial institution tax. The operations fund has some other revenue streams, like if the FFY pays us to use our buses to transport kids every day. There's some more in there, but the two debt service funds, the operating referendum, and the operations fund, those are all primary. Those are the ones that property taxes pay for and drive that tax rate. Okay, summarizing then, this is the slide with the total budget. Last year, $152.2 million, and then proposed for 2025 is $168.5 million. Total increase of about 10.7%. But I do want to point out that about 6.1 million of that is drawing down from existing cash. And so if you take that out, you would say that we're going to increase revenues from other sources about 6.7%. And then the last slide I usually like to show you too is just a reminder of where we are from a cash balance history. And so in the education fund, you saw at the beginning of the year we were just under 6.4. Rainy day fund hasn't changed in a few years. Operations has been right around that 14 million for the last couple of years. The operating referendum fund was just over 3 million. And then the debt funds are the ones that we have seen a decline every year. And I remind you each time that that will continue as new debt replaces old debt, because that's the one fund that the DLGF says you can only carry a certain amount of cash based on the next year's payment. And it's 15% of the next year's payment. And so, reminder, the next step is 2 weeks from tonight when there'll be a public hearing. And then a month later, we'll have the vote on the final advertised rate, levy, and budget. Go back to this slide and ask if there are any other questions before we move on.
I've just got a quick one, Dr. Phillips. I think it's the following slide after this one. It's got the, yeah. Is there a kind of a rule of thumb or a recommendation for percent of total budget that should be kept in the rainy day account?
So everyone uses the rainy day account a little bit differently. We don't touch the rainy day fund in our district. Some districts budget it each year and then carry over the balance from year to year. But so we generally look at the dollars that are available for us to spend. Our education fund, rainy day fund, operations fund, and operating referendum. The debt funds we can't touch for anything else. They make payments on existing debt. So when you add those four columns up, that's generally the cash balance that we have in place. And the general recommendation for public entities is between 8 and 12% of expenditures is what you would want to have on hand. And so on a $160 million budget, you can do that 12 and a half, 26, just about 30 million. On a $160 million budget, you can do the math there. We're a little higher than what you would recommend, or what the general recommendation is, which is why we're moving to draw them down responsibly.
And if I recall correctly, I think it was a couple meetings ago, we had the cash balances up there, and operations fund was set to have a fairly high jump. Is this I'm seeing this is January 1, so this doesn't account for that jump that was planned for this year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just going back. It doesn't have estimates for this coming year end. Okay, we will send out the larger budget book within the next week, and look forward to the hearing on the 23rd. Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is public comment, so I'll remind everybody of our process here. If you ever want to speak at a board meeting, when you come in the door here at the admin building, there's a blue sheet on the table. You just put your name on here. We ask for your address, make sure you're a resident, and then you can put the topic that you'd like to speak on. You will get 3 minutes. It will be on the clock over there, so you can see that as you speak. I ask that you stick to the 3 minutes, and I'll have you wrap up. You can defer to a spokesperson. If somebody before you has spoken on a topic and they said exactly or very similarly to what you would have said, you could say, I just agree with so-and-so, and decide not to add to that. Please don't use names of specific individuals, staff members, specific positions. It's the same thing. We want to make sure we keep this professional and talk on topics, not people. And no cheers and jeers from the audience. It can be intimidating for people to come up and speak in front of this group on YouTube, and so I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable doing that and we maintain a professional environment here. So with that, I have Brenda Clark first.
My name is Brenda Clark, and I wanted to speak tonight on BCSC's policy 5516. We have members of my family that have been traumatized, humiliated, embarrassed. I have put in 18 phone calls since February to schools and to this building to speak to people. I have had 1 phone call returned. My grandson, which I have guardianship of, received death threats. And in today's world and what just happened in Georgia, I have read your policy, 5516. None of these children are getting even a slap on the wrist for what they are doing to other children. And I think it is something that needs to be addressed. Even though it is Bartholomew County, it can happen here. We pulled our grandson out of BCSC and put him in a private school because we feared for his life. Shouldn't be that way. Schools should be a safe place for every child, every teacher, every employee. And it just saddens me. It breaks my heart when my grandchildren come running to me. They're afraid to go to school. They're embarrassed. It's not right, and something should be done. All I'm asking, enforce your own policy. I don't think that's asking too much. And I'm sorry, this is off what you're talking about tonight. You're talking about money. I'm talking about safety for our children and workers. Our children are our future. Please, do everything you can to keep them safe. I don't like it that I have two other grandchildren in the school system, and they do not want to get up and go to school at all because of what they have to endure. Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you, Ms. Clark. Mark Niemöller.
Mark Niemiller of South Gladstone Avenue about my book complaint against Push. The review committee and Principal Parsons' denial of my complaint are based on Indiana codes that are in BCSC's book complaint policy. The committee's letter goes into great detail arguing how the book complies with state law. But since my complaint does not allege that the book violates the law, that argument is moot. Indiana law does not apply here, let alone require that the book remain in the school library. Therefore, the basis of my complaint has not been addressed, let alone refuted. My complaint is only that Push's large amount of extremely profane and vulgar descriptions of sex acts, organs, and situations is not changed by a good overall message. Push has far more obscenity than any other book in East Library, a reality that is not changed by a good message or state law. Push's degree of obscene content makes it unsuitable for the school library. Excuse me. This position is based on the most fundamental standards of our community. While the book does not violate the law, it clearly violates our community standards. While it's true that Push has some good messages, no amount of good context, whether literary, artistic, or scientific, can magically make the obscene parts suitable for the school library or comply with community standards. For example, our local paper never publishes obscene language in its educational articles. If anything represents community standards, it is the local newspaper. Also, the student handbook of East High School apparently follows the same community standards. In multiple parts, it strictly forbids students or teachers from using profanity or vulgarity in school. Also, the movie version of Push is rated R and cannot be shown to minors without a parent. Even though the movie Precious is a toned-down version of Push, a school library cannot legally have it. In none of these examples does a good message justify obscenity. In fact, if a teacher at East were to use profanity or vulgarity to teach in class, he would be subject to disciplinary consequences. And if a teacher were to read parts of Push aloud in class, he could be fired. There are countless other examples showing that good messages do not make the degree of obscene language in Push suitable for minors. All in all, state law is an invalid basis for denying this complaint, and in no way prevents this board from choosing a higher standard of reading for its students and voting to screen this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niemöller. Samantha Eisen.
Hello. Today I want to address the issue of teacher safety. Being at the top of the Department of Education staff attacks by students report should be embarrassing to this administration and board. Teachers are the backbone of our educational system. They are individuals who dedicate their lives to educating, guiding, and inspiring our youth. They take on the profession with the passion of commitment, going above and beyond to nurture the minds of our future leaders. Any threat to their safety can create an atmosphere of fear and distraction, which can affect the ability to teach effectively and connect with their students. Over the past week, I have had teachers who have fled the BCSC school district reach out to me explaining the chaos they have been told to work through. Testimonies of teachers being smacked, punched, kicked, tackled, and strangled, expected to come to work the next day and work with the same students. I have also had concerned community members reach out with similar events. While I have watched these school board meetings over the past few years, there has been no stress on safety. If anything, our schools are becoming less safe due to the attacks on these teachers, but also the lack of the security and structure this board has created. We must stop with the "it never happens to us" mentality and recognize that it is happening to us. We must be proactive instead of reactive and stop with this, and I quote, "If someone wants to hurt you, they will" mindset. We have a massive issue that needs to be addressed immediately, not only at school, but at home. Our teachers deserve better, our students deserve better, and our community deserves better. And our core belief should also say learning is most effective when our children and teachers are safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Cole Bennett?
Good evening, BCSC School Board. My name is Cole Bennett. I live on the north side of Columbus. And I'm also here to speak about student safety, but from a different angle. Looking through your agenda, I'm pretty disappointed that there has been no mention of the mass shooting that occurred in Georgia this past week, where 4 innocent people, 2 children and 2 teachers, lost their lives. And honestly, I'm not surprised because we become so desensitized to mass shootings in the United States. But as someone who grew up learning how to hide under a table before I knew all the names of all 50 states, I think this issue bears some recognition. And I remember when I was in 6th grade over at Parkside, asking my teacher, after Sandy Hook in 2011, asking her, "Are we safe here?" And I think about this grandmother whose grandchild asked the same question. I know kids are asking the same question. They're scared to go to school. And while I'm thrilled to hear that there's been a $2 million investment according to the operations budget for safety and security, I think there needs to be more. You can't tell me in a $38 million budget there's not some room for cutting fat. I mean, we need metal detectors in all schools, 1 exit, 1 entrance policies. We need more SROs. I was at the Citizens Academy through the Columbus Police Department, learning about SROs. There isn't one at every school all the time. They have to transport to different schools. There needs to be one present at all times. This is the reality that we live in and have been living in ever since I was in elementary school. I feel like little to nothing has changed and we just don't even recognize it anymore. We just gloss over it like it's not important. I think children's lives are important because children deserve to feel safe at school. And I read the Republic this past Saturday talking about how DCS is enthralled, especially here in Bartholomew County. They've already had 117 substantiated cases of child abuse and neglect. Kids deserve to come to a safe school. And I think this is the future of America. And what are we teaching children when they're not even feeling safe in their own schools, where they should be? I hate that we're here. I hate that this is happening across the country, but this is an excellent opportunity at the local level. And I'm not talking guns, because I know you guys can't legislate that at all. I'm talking about common sense solutions that you can support. And I'm not talking 4-year plan, 5-year plan. I want to know something that's being done today, this month, this year, to protect our kids. And I applaud the SROs that already work. They do excellent work. And liberals will say that we're militarizing schools. Conservatives will say that it's too expensive. Number one, I had a great relationship with Officer Stevens. And number two, like I said, $38 million in operations budget. There's some room for cutting for safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Okay, that's all we had for public comments today. Next on the agenda.
All right, thank you. We have old business, the minutes of the regular school board meeting from August 19th, the work session prior to that on the same date, and the minutes from the executive session on September 6th of 2024.
I move that we approve items 7A through C as presented.
A second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve items 7A through C. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you. On request for approval under new business, we have the supplemental contracts, regular supplemental contracts, field trips and professional leaves, as well as school fundraisers, and claims and payroll. The claims for September 9th, 2024 and through today's date, and also the August 11th, 2024 payroll. I will we'll come back to other new items, and I'll request approval for items 8A through 8D.
I move that we approve items under new business, under number 8, A through D, as presented by Dr. Phillips.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes and Mr. Schultz. A motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments on items 8A through D before we go to vote? None from the team? Okay. All those in favor of approving items 8A through D, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you. And then I'm not sure how you all want to approach items, the other items on the agenda, if you want to take them one at a time, or?
I think, Dr. Phillips, why don't you just go through the entire list, and then we'll let the board make motions as they see fit.
Sounds good. The remaining new business items, items E through I, included a determination regarding the contested library book push from Columbus East High School, approval of the reorganization of board policies, the first package that went through its first reading at the last board meeting, permission to donate excess equipment from Columbus East High School from Dr. Bozeman's materials sent to the board before, and then also closing out the field lighting at Columbus East and Columbus North high schools, a reduction in the final change order for that project, as well as the same for the north side chiller replacement. Both of those are final closing out of the contract, and both result in a net reduction of the contract. So I do request approval of items 8E through 8I.
I'll ask that E be pulled out.
Okay, do I have a motion from the board?
I have a motion to amend line item E to where it changes it from providing general access of the book push to access requiring parental consent prior to.
Second.
Okay, so I believe, and I'm looking at my good friend, Mr. MacGyver over there, we have a motion and a second to amend item E, which would require a parental consent to check out the book push. Do we vote on the amendment, or we vote on amended E? Because those are two slightly different things. I just want to make sure we're doing this correctly.
You are obligated by your policy to make a determination on the book challenge. So I want to be clear what, Mr. Schultz, your amendment is.
So the last line says that the book shall remain on shelf, I believe, if I recall. That is being recommended to be amended to requiring the parental consent prior to access. Something to that effect.
I'm pulling up the document real quick.
You're good.
So I think the first step, so Mr. Schultz, included in your packet was a proposed document, proposed findings for the board to be considered under item E. Mm-hmm. The requested proposed amendment in front of the board is that those findings would be amended so that the conclusion that the board is making as part of those findings, as it is prepared today, it says the decision of the evaluation committee is upheld and the book may remain on the shelves of Columbus East High School Media Center. The proposed amendment is that that finding would be, that conclusion would be modified to say with a parental consent to access it. So, Mrs. Wielden, to your question, I think the first step for the board would be to vote on that amendment is the board willing to make that agreement, make that amendment?
Okay, okay. And what is needed in order for that amendment to be made? Is it majority?
Correct. That is, as in the past, when we have looked at like amending the words of a policy that is in front of the board, a draft policy, effectively, that's where we're at this point, is amending that proposed finding that's in there.
Okay, okay. So the motion and the second that we all need to decide on is whether we want to amend E to include a step for there to be parental consent in order to check out the book Push. All those in, yes.
Discussion.
Discussion. Thank you, Mr. Stenner.
Mr. Schultz wants to say something.
I appreciate it, Mr. Stenner. And again, right, I know it was kind of misunderstood in the last one. Whenever we're voting on one of these things, there's like 9 or 10 items, and if you don't agree with all of them, you have to vote no. And the last item is essentially general access, right? And so that's what I just motioned to amend. I want to make sure it's clear, like no one is recommending the term banning books or removing books from the library. The argument and the discussion here, which has been a gap, I think, on the political rhetoric, is whether or not the parent has the ability to consent prior to the general access. I think it's really important that we lower the temperature of this concern, just given the issues that we've had locally, but also the issues that we have nationally across this. And although the book has a great message, I mean, I read it and reviewed it. It's 136 pages. It's got nearly 400 obscenities and vulgarity. It's got hundreds of uses of racial slurs and derogatory terms that I would never want my children to use or consider used in everyday language. And it also has several accounts of detailed sexual abuse and child rape, which I don't find appropriate, as I'm sure this camera is staring in my general direction, to detail those accounts, especially as we hope that children are getting involved in the civic-minded process and watching this. I just know that if this book was given as classroom literature, as I've talked with teachers across the district, when they hand out stuff for literature, it would require parental consent. As I believe Mr. Niemöller said, it's an R-rated movie on a toned-down version of the book. Can't really get it into the classroom without parental consent. And it's really the same content, same children. And I'm just not understanding the different outcomes. But again, right, that's what I want the board to see is a clean motion around parental consent, not around removing, banning, or restriction sections or anything like that of the book. And really the question here is, are the parents going to be afforded the ability for consent prior to this adult content reaching their children? As the father of daughters that have taken and had that same abuse done to them, I would like that ability. And I don't know why we're not affording the parents that ability. And I know the options are going to be, you can review everything in the library catalog and go line by line and request it. I just don't think that's what we call accessible options to people that are barely making it by and are working, in a lot of cases, 2 jobs to scroll the rolls of our library. And especially now that, I mean, as the father of elementary school children, finding out that now there's a self-checkout option in the libraries, which is a new thing to me. I don't know how it would even be policed in the first place. So I'm just saying, as a father of daughters that took on that abuse, I would like to be able to give afforded the ability to have the consent before that would make it to my teenage daughter's hands. And so that's why I'm making this motion.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the team?
Yeah, this is never easy. I've done this once before. Again, read the whole book. I probably had a slightly different count of bad words. I went through and highlighted every curse word, derogatory word in the book. I counted 363 of them in the 136 pages for 2.7 per page. I mean, just me trying to go through this right now makes me almost want to throw up, right? I mean, this is just, it's from a standpoint of having these books challenged, the parental approval takes the challenge away, right? So in the words of the author in the afterword, too often controversial texts are not taught regularly in the classroom because teachers themselves are not confident enough to engage their students in discussion of the recognizably challenging and sensitive subject matter. the words, I mean, I'm not going to even say them. There's so many of them. But this, I'm going to just read this because this is what I found to be the most abhorrent portion of the book. And I get you have to tell a story, but this isn't even an autobiography or a biography. It's all fiction. So the author can use whatever words or stories that they feel to be appropriate. So this portion has the mother, the father, and a baby in part of this. Carl got my titty in his mouth. Nothing wrong with that. It's natural. But I think that's the day it started. I don't ever remember nothing before that. I hot. He sucking my titty. My eyes closed. I know he getting hard. I can see without my eyes. I love him so much. I was raised by a psychomaniac fool. He climbed on me, you know. You understand. No, tell us some more, you stupid bitch. So he on me, then he reached over to Precious. Now Precious is a baby. Start with his finger between her legs. I say, Carl, what are you doing? He say, shut your big ass up. This is good for her. Then he get off me, take her Pampers off, and try and stick his thing in Precious. You know what tripped me out? It almost can go in Precious. I think she's some kind of freak baby then. I say to Carl, stop. I want him on me. I never wanted him to hurt her. I'm shaken reading that. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure you understand how I'm going to vote. This should be something that a parent can give approval to their child to read. Because I bet most everybody in this room right now can't even look up, probably, without shaking their head and thinking, what the hell did he just say? And so, you know, we all want to sit here and talk about all of us being adults. I'm 49 years old. I don't understand this, right? I don't understand why it's necessary to tell a story. I think there's so many other ways to tell a story, and I would challenge any real doctor to come in here and say that we fight trauma with reintroduction to trauma. So this is beyond the pale.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Before we go to a vote on the motion to amend.
Sure, I'm wondering if Dr. Phillips or somebody from the administration could remind me, I think we've talked about this in the past, if a parent is concerned about a book and their child having access to it, or even a style of book or a book that addresses certain topics, what, under the current system, what do they do to make sure that their children don't see a book or a book that deals with certain subjects?
With any concern, including one like this, the one that you described, the step we always request parents to take is reach out to your child's teacher first, and then the building administration or person closest to the issue. If it was a library book, it would be the librarian or media center specialist. So contacting the school and saying, making a request that their student not have access to the book.
And are you aware of teachers or librarians not being willing to do that?
No.
I'll go ahead. This may be, I was going to speak a little later, but now seems like an appropriate time. So as a high school educator for the past 34 years, and currently having 4 grandsons all attending BCSC schools, I do feel compelled to provide just a brief statement on that explains my stance on the book Push. And I can say that I did read Push in its entirety twice in an honest, sincere effort to understand both sides of the issue, of which I think both sides have very valid points. And I can also say each time that I read the book, it was a very emotional experience for me. And so I'm not sure that anybody could argue that parts of the book's contents aren't extremely graphic, horrifying, and raw, as they describe the sexual, physical, emotional abuse that the book's main character, Precious, had to endure. I can tell you, after 34 years in education, most of those spent working with kids that would be considered at risk, I have heard remarkably similar and believe it or not, even worse stories than that depicted in Push. And so as Mr. Bennett alluded to earlier, we don't have to look far to find cases of devastating circumstances that today's youth are exposed to. As he stated, the main headline in Saturday's Republic was child welfare cases soar in the county. And the article went on to describe several heartbreaking cases of what children in Bartholomew County have been put through in the recent past. And so, all things considered, to me, Push isn't just a book that describes, often in very vivid detail, the atrocities that Precious had to endure. It's most importantly, at least in my opinion, a book about hope. It's a book about a girl coming to realize what happened to her was not her fault. It's a book about a girl realizing she's not alone in the world as she met others that had also endured unspeakable abuse, which helped her to feel alive inside. It's a book about the power of education and the positive impact a teacher or any other caring adult can have in a child's life. And as Precious gradually learned how to read and write, her confidence and self-worth also took a positive trajectory. It's a book about resiliency, connection, and the incredible power of positive relationships. And lastly, I'll just say again, I believe it's a book about hope. And it's my hope for those that have endured terrible distresses similar to that as Precious in the book, that if they might happen to read the book, that they can realize that they're not alone and it's not their fault. As for others that might happen to read the book, I hope they may develop a heightened sense of compassion for others and a willingness to do what they are able to do in order to help so many of our youth that are currently hurting and struggling. That's it.
So I was going to save my comments for later too, but I guess I'll throw them out here now. So I read it last summer because I decided to proactively read some of these books, and it was one of the most uncomfortable books I've ever read. I looked up about the author, and it is fiction, but the author was a remedial reading teacher in New York City, and it's actually a compilation of many stories that she heard from many students, and that made a difference to me. But I think whether we remove it from the shelf or whether we somehow label it as controversial, I would like to think of it from the perspective of two different groups of students. And one is students that have experienced one or more of these traumas. If we remove it or we label it somehow a controversial book, that sends the message to them that their stories and their experiences, there's something wrong with them. And it's not what people did to them, but there's something wrong with what they experienced in their life. And that's not a message I want to send to kids. The other students that I think it's important for is students who have never experienced that. As difficult as it is to read, I hope that one thing our students get out of their BCSC experience is empathy for others that have experienced things that they have not experienced. And that's one of the things I got out of this book. And the other big thing I got out of this book, to go along with what Mr. Grimes said, I'm a retired teacher, but I'm always a teacher, and to see the impact that a positive relationship between a teacher and a student can have on that student. When I got done, I wanted every teacher I know to read the book, because it's an inspiration in terms of the impact a teacher can have when a teacher sees potential and value and something to respect in a student that didn't see that in herself.
Thank you. Anything?
I get to speak now, huh?
Yes, if you'd like to.
I understand, Logan. I understand what you're saying. But my past experience in law enforcement, I seen all of this happen to people. And everybody wants to push it under the carpet. They don't want it to be brought out. Some way we have to bring it out and let people know that this is happening to our kids, period. Not just this book, but people need to speak up and speak out about how things are happening here in Bethune County, in the state of Indiana, and in this nation. That book is not going to poison a person's mind, but it's also going to help some kids speak up for themselves. And that's what I felt the book does. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
I do have one question in response
Yes.
to Chad, or Dr. Phillips to Mr. Center. When you mentioned that there's ways to, obviously work with librarians and teachers, how does that work with the new self-checkout process across a lot of the schools? Because so for example, my daughter explained her process of going through, and she was in there when there was no librarian. So how would that work if there isn't a person present in the library?
I would have to look into it, but between the child's teacher and the librarian, knowing if a class was coming with that student in it, just to put those safeguards in place, I'm making assumptions there that that's how they would approach it, particularly depending on the school.
From a fourth grader's view, there could have been someone in the room for all I know, but that was her description of the process. And Mr. Bryan, I know you want to use Pat, but I really appreciate what you said. And although I brought this more from a heart, right? Because I do experience this for my own two daughters, and I've had more DCS therapists in my home than I have fingers and toes. Like, no therapist has ever said, you solve trauma with more trauma. That just creates PTSD and triggers. What they always give is, how do you get to the proactive ways, like how you mentioned, to bring this out? And that's proper education of sexual abuse. And that needs to be the forefront of any mitigation plan for those with sexual abuse, because I actually just consulted with 3 therapists before I came here, and they're like, the number of people that will start, expressing their risks in that 2nd to 3rd grade window when they start saying, the good touch, bad touch conversations, that's the most critical element of a proactive mitigation plan. And so I appreciate that BCSC does it, a book that I believe has been checked out less than a half dozen times over how many years. I don't see it.
It was checked out 15 times since 2009. The other book that they had, because they had 2 copies, was purchased in 2010, checked out 14 times. It was marked lost in 2015. So since 2015, it's a handful of times, once a year. It's never been required reading by any teacher. And that kind of ties to the media resource, it's to support school curriculum, student learning, student interests. So, and the movie Precious has never been shown, which is rated R.
Okay.
And would require parental permission.
Thank you, Mr. Major. So I'm going to take us back to the task at hand for the group. To remind everybody, there is a process to request a book be removed. Mr. Niemöller went through that process. Once a request is made, there's a committee formed to review that request. That committee makes a recommendation. Their recommendation was to keep the book in the library. Mr. Niemöller then has 30 days from receiving that in order to petition that it be escalated to the board for a decision. Once we receive that request, which we did formally in our July 15th meeting, we have 60 days by which we need to make a decision and then go back to Mr. Niemöller with our final decision, which is what is happening tonight in this meeting. So we do need to make a decision tonight. I think the motion and the second that we need to decide on first is whether we would like to amend item 8E to include a requirement that a permission slip, in effect,
Parental consent, yeah.
parental consent would be required for anybody to check this book out. So in this vote, if you vote yay, you would like for that to be a requirement added to 8E. If you vote nay, then you do not. Is everybody clear with that? It's a little different than normal. Okay. So we are voting on, I'm sorry, I don't know what the audience is doing. Okay, I think it will be, notice we can raise hands, but yay and nay will raise hands. Would that be okay?
It wouldn't be my decision anyway. Someone from the board would have to request it.
I was just distracted by the motions in the audience.
Sorry. We'll write down your names.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine, no problem.
So real quick, yay is we do want parental sign off, nay is we don't.
Yes.
Okay.
So the motion that has been made is to amend the proposed findings. As they were written, it just said remain on the shelves. This first question is, do you want to add to that available with parental consent?
Right. That's what I said.
And are we raising our hands, or what's the plan here?
I'll
Just so I make sure.
raise my hand.
Okay, we'll raise our hand, okay.
If the members of the audience, if we have a time for public comment, this is not it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and call the vote the way you
I think
normally would.
yay and nay, we can see mouths move. You can see us. Okay. Yay or nay from the team, if that's okay. If vote yay, if you would like item 8E to add parental consent required.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. 2 yays. All those opposed say nay. Nay. It was a 2-5 vote. That motion is denied. I now need a motion from the board regarding item 8E.
I would move that we approve item 8E as originally presented to us in our board packet.
I second.
Mr. Grimes, thank you, Mr. Nellen. All those in favor of approving item 8E as presented tonight in the packet, please say yay. Yay. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries 7-0. Okay. We have items 8F through I still on the table for the team.
I move to propose line items 8F through I as presented.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz and Mr. Bryant. We have a motion to approve items 8F through I. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Wheeldon, Dr. Phillips, and members of the Board of School Trustees. The 5 human resources recommendations for this evening consist of 2 appointments, 2 resignations, and 1 leave of absence. I request that you please approve the personnel recommendations as presented in the board packet.
I move that we approve the HR recommendations as presented by Dr. Stahlbaum.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes and Mr. Bryant. Any comments or questions? Okay. All those in favor of approving HR recommendations as presented, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. Dr. Stahlbaum.
There are 2 additional personnel recommendations for this evening, and I request that you please approve the additional personnel recommendations as presented in the board packet.
I move to approve the additional human resource recommendations as presented.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz and Mr. Major. All those in favor of approving additional human resources recommendations, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Thank you. Motion carries. Dr. Stahlbaum. Okay, board input and review. Mr. Nowlin, would you like to start, please?
I don't think I have anything.
Okay.
I'll render myself speechless today.
Okay, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you to Mrs. Vogel, Mr. Finley, Ms. Dwyer, Mrs. Myers for your presentation on unified sports and activities in BCSC. That's much appreciated. Also, thank you to Dr. Phillips for taking on his old role tonight and providing yet another thorough, well-explained, taking us through the budget. And then lastly, a sincere thank you for the 4 community members that spoke here this evening and for all others that were in attendance. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. It was mentioned earlier, I just want to point out in 2 days it is September 11th, so I just ask that everybody find a police officer or a fireman, emergency services, somebody that takes really great care of us and appreciate them this week. That's all. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Stenner, do you have anything?
Great comments made already. I'll just ditto.
Thank you. Mr. Major, anything?
Yeah, I'll echo the unified sports comments. I think one of the things that I've been able to observe as my daughter went through high school was just the leadership that several of the high school students were able to show, just with the excitement, enthusiasm, and engagement that they had within unified sports. The leadership they were able to develop, along with giving many young children, young students, and teenagers opportunities to go out and do something that is a little bit harder for them to do than the average kid, and be successful, see success, and understand that that there's opportunities for them to, do a lot of different things in their life that they might not have thought they could. So, great job to everybody that supports that. Hopefully we see those numbers rise. Post-COVID, obviously, there's a dip, but hopefully we can see that number continue to rise. So thanks to everybody that works on that committee and initiative.
Mr. Bryant?
If you haven't been to a sports event like the Unified, you need to go. That's all I have to say. You need to go.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Oh, thank you, Officer Sam, sitting back here.
Mrs. Wielden, can I just add a couple of notes?
Yes, of course.
I'll start with one sad one and then move on to happy ones. I want to thank Mr. Bennett for bringing in front of us a reminder of the events that happened down in Georgia from last week. It is a sad commentary that they very quickly fade into the background of our lives when we have another school shooting. And so thanks for reminding us that those things cannot become commonplace. And then on a more positive note, I promise to not always just recount my weekend in front of you, but this weekend was tremendous. So Friday night, the Indiana Department of Education honored a number of schools and educators from across the state, but Veronica Buckler, who was our top 10 teacher from last year, top 10 teacher in the state last year, was honored, as well as Twinette Miller at Schmidt, who was the state's RISE Award winner for classified staff. So it was a great event downtown. Everybody gets to dress up and have a fancy dinner. And then on Saturday morning, speaking of athletic events, if you haven't been to an elementary cross-country event, to watch those kids. It was 550 or so kids plus a couple of parents. So apologies to everybody in the Richards area who couldn't get out of their driveway this weekend at the beginning of Saturday morning. But it is a terrifically fun event to watch. All of the kids sprint right off the bat, and then they're all walking within 200 yards, with the exception of those that have learned how to pace themselves. But those poor third and fourth grade girls, I think about a third of them, by the time they finished, they were crying, including the winner. She was crying, and she was dominant. She won by a lot. But then on Sunday, Columbus North had their first play. I don't know how they memorized and performed and produced a play in the first month of school, but it was really, really well done. And so congratulations to them. And then the last thing I will mention is that I attended my first ever Ganesh Festival on Sunday evening. And so I want to thank Dr. Kolhatkar, who invited me to that event and let me smash the coconut on the ground to start the procession to the river. It was a tremendous experience. Next year is the 21st year of that in Columbus, and it's one of the biggest in the state of Indiana. One of the biggest Ganesh festivals in the state of Indiana. It was a terrific learning experience on my part for a culture that's really important to our community. So thank everybody for a great weekend, and just point out all of the amazing things that our kids participate in every given weekend of the year. Thanks for letting me.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Okay, our next meeting is on September 23rd at 6:30. That will be the public hearing for the budget. And I'd also like to address another comment that was made tonight regarding the Department of Education report that came out last week regarding injuries of staff. There have been a lot of conversations since that report came out, and we're providing the administrative team some time to kind of present that data to us and help us answer some of the questions that we have regarding that information. So just be on the lookout for that agenda. If it can make it into the 23rd, I think we'd all like it to, or it may be a different session altogether. But I think we all agree we need to respond and understand that information better so that we can have a good plan going forward. We're just not sure exactly where it fits. So next meeting in here is September 23rd at 6:30 p.m. With that, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.